So today we are going to be talking about the object data structure. We are going to talk briefly about objects. We've touched on objects before, but we're going to go over them again. And then we'll talk about built-in objects in JavaScript. But for today, we'll talk only about the array. I'll talk about the other built-in objects next time we meet. So objects, we already know objects are variables to hold values in key value pairs. And the syntax for an object is just basically the curly braces and then the key, which is followed by a column and our value. And then another one separated by a commas and another key value pair. Now objects can have properties and methods. For the properties, for this object now, constants my objects, the properties are first name and last name. So those are the properties of this object. Just like an object in life, any objects in life, a phone, a car, you can have properties like the color, the name, the make, and then the methods are like the functions or the actions that object can take. Like you can drive a car, you can move a car, or you can put on a phone, things like that. So this object now has properties, first name and last name, and you can have that. To access the properties of an object, you use the dot syntax or the brackets. So to access let's access the first name of my object here, use the dot syntax. So you use my object dot the property you are trying to access. Property you are trying to access. Okay, let me log this onto the console so you can see the results. I want to run that, we get the value of the property we are trying to access. So the same way we use the bracket syntax, we can also use it to access the property we want. So we use brackets, square brackets, and we'll put the property we want in it, the square brackets.
You don't follow part of. Just root. Huh? Root. Not yet. Everything has come out.
And we have the this. When we are using the square bracket syntax, you put the property you want to access in the key. You put it in in parentheses. So that's how you access the properties of an object. For methods, we say methods are like the actions the object can perform. So to add the method to this object, what we are going to use is add a key, and then the value is going to be a function that returns something, or a function basically. So let's say we want a method that will return the full name of this object now. We give a function, we use the function keyword in this case. And then what we are going to return is, let's just put like a function in there. The this keyword is a reserved keyword. This keyword over here is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, and you use it. What you just use is, it means that you are accessing this object, this particular object, my object. So that is what this is referring to. So when you use this for first name, you're accessing the first name using dot notation, just the way we use it down here. You're accessing the first name of this object, the property name first name of this object. Now we're adding the first name to the last name, and we're going to return it in this function. That's what a method is. That's what a method is. So this full name is a method. The reason why we're using the function keyword here and not the arrow function is because in the arrow function, the this keyword is going to refer to the function itself, because it is block scope. It's going to refer to the function itself and not the object. But if you use this function keyword to declare your function, the this keyword is going to refer to the object. So to access a method is the same way. You use the dot notation, or you use the dot notation. You use the dot notation, and then you call the method. So let's say console, let me log it to the console. My object dot full name. And since it is a method, is a function, you call it or you invoke it. And when we log this to the console, we're going to get our function there. So that's basically it for like basics of objects, methods, and properties. So now we're going to talk about built-in objects in JavaScript. We have arrays, we have strings, we have numbers, we have booleans, and some other ones. But today we're going to talk about arrays, their properties, their methods, and everything you can literally do with an array. So that's what we're going to go over today. So an array, we know an array is a special variable that can hold more than one value at a time. You know the syntax for creating arrays. I've gone over all those ones. Okay, so we're going to create an array now. So we're going to use throughout. So we know the syntax for creating an array. Const my array. So I'm just going to create an array of strings. Let's use cars. BMW. Let's use an array of 3 cars. Benz. So this is an array. Now to access an element in this array, we are going to use the square brackets, not the dot notation this time. We're going to use the square brackets we used before, and we're going to access the index of the element in this array. Oh, I used curly braces here. Sorry, square brackets. So we're going to access the index of the element in this array. For the indexing, arrays are index paired. You know that objects are key value paired. Arrays are paired with their indexes, so you cannot, they don't have keys to access the value, so you use the index of the array. And for arrays, the index starts from 0, not 1. So if we're counting the index of this array now, BMW is going to be at index 0, Volvo is going to be at index 1, and Benz is going to be at index 2. So if we run this, if we want to access Volvo, we are just going to, let me log this so we can see what we're doing. Also log my array of, we're going to use the square brackets and the index, which is 1, and we're going to get Volvo in our console. So that is how you access an array. We use the const keyword. You know, I said before that const, when you use const to declare a variable, the variable is immutable. So when you use the const to declare an array, the array is immutable in that you cannot reassign that array, but you can mutate the values of that array. So now if you want to mutate the values of my array, now let's say we want to change Volvo here to any other car. Can't think of any other car now because I'm trying, I'm typing. So we use the square bracket to access it. So we are going to be like my array of the index that we want to mutate. So Volvo, so 1. Volvo is index 1, so my array of 1, and we use the equal sign, equals to, let's see, Opel. And if we run this, sorry, we're not going to get anything. Oh, we logged it. Let me log my array of 1 again. My array of 1 equals to Opel, and then console.log my array of 1. And then let's run this, and we get Opel in the console. So that way we've changed my array of 1. Let me move this so we stop seeing Volvo in the console, so you don't get confused. So let's run this again. Network is stuck now, so let's stop that and let's refresh the environment. So while we're doing that, so that's how you change the element of an array or the value in an array. So let's talk about some of the main properties of an array that we are going to be using. Let's talk about the length property now. So the length property of an array returns the length of that array. So it basically returns the number of elements or values. We use elements for arrays, not values. So let me start using elements now. So the length property is going to return number of elements in that array. So you use the dot notation and you just access it like my array dot length. So any array dot length, and it's going to return the number of elements in that array. Once my online environment loads now, I'm going to work it. Let's see. Okay, I have connection now. So for now, for my array here, we have 3 elements. So if we log, okay, this is still acting up. So if we log my array dot length, oh yes, and I have to confirm how we spell length because that is always like my biggest bug every time I write programs. Spelling of length, and here it returns 3. Always returns an integer number of elements in the array. So here we have 3 elements in the array and it returns 3. So that is the length property. Very important when you need to access, when you need to work with arrays, the length property. And also we need to understand that the length property, the property of the length is always 1 higher than the index. You know, when you're counting the length, you start from 1, 2, 3 and you count 3. But when you're trying to access the index, you start from 0. So the length is always 1 higher. So if you want to access the index of the last element of this array, you can just subtract 1 from the length, because you know that the length is always going to be higher than 1. And then we're going to get the index of the last element. And we have 2 here. So if you want to access the last element or want to get the last element, you can just, let me log that. So my array, using the length variable, my array, sorry, the length property, or length, my array of, yes, so my array dot length minus 1, and it's going to return the last element in the array. Why is it returning undefined? Okay, let me just debug this real quick. Not a number. I think I misspelled length again. Yes, as usual. Yes, I misspelled length again, and I was just warning you guys about that. So it's going to be my array or my array.length, and like this we are going to get bears in our console, because that is the second. So that way you can access the last element in an array. So that is the main property we need to know about arrays. Now let's talk about methods, array methods. We have a lot of methods in arrays. When we are trying to get through our algorithms, data structures, and this, you are going to need these methods. So you need to know the methods, like you need to know the methods you can, because you're going to be working with arrays and objects a lot. So the first method, to convert a string, an array to a string, you can use the toString method or the join method. So we have 2 methods we can use here. We have the toString array.prototype.toString, the toString method, and we have the join method. So let me comment this out so they don't interfere with the program. So still using my array here, I want to convert my array to string. We just use the dot notation, my array dot to string. Let me log that. want to run that. We have our array converted to string, BMW, Volvo, and Benz. And we also have the join method. The join method does the same thing as to string, but you can decide what you want as a separator of your array. So for example, now if we do console, let me log it out, console.log my array.join, and we don't do anything, we are going to have BMW, Volvo, and Benz back. But if we have a separate something to join it, like let's say a space, so let's put a space, I'll run this. It gets separated by a space, not a comma. So we can put anything in there. Let me put joiner. Then we'll run it, and our array is going to be separated by joiner. So that is when you need to use the join method, when you need something as a separator between the elements of the array. So that's the first method we'll go about, the toString. Those are the first set of methods we'll go about, toString and join. Now let's talk about pop, the pop method. Yes, pop. The pop method removes the last element from an array. So, and it returns it, yes. It removes the last element from an array and it returns that element. So keep in mind that it is going to modify the initial array. So it's going to remove the last element and return it for you. So we have console.log. Let's log it.
I know. I need the extension, please.
So if we pop this now, it's going to return the last element to us, which is Benz. Let me remove this so we don't get confused. And now if we log the initial array, I will run that, we are going to have two elements left because Benz has been popped out of the array. So that is what we use the pop method for, removing the last element of the array. We also have the push method. Push is for adding a new element to an array at the end. So when you want to add a new element to the end of an array, you use the push method. So now let's add Benz back to an array after popping it out. So let me log it out. Okay, let me just do my array dot push.
I'm open now.
Let's add Benz back to an array, to the array. And when you use the push method, you know the pop method returned the element that was popped out. The push method is going to return the length of the array. So if we log it, we're going to get back the length of the array, and Benz is going to be added to the array back. So now the length of the array is 4. Oh, we added Benz again because I removed the pop this time. So when we log our array, we are going to have Benz at the end of the array. So we have Benz 2 times now. And that's what the push method does. So the next method we are going to go over is the shift method. The shift method removes the first array element and it shifts all the other elements to shift their indexes. And the shift method returns the element that was shifted out as usual. So the shift method is like pop, because pop removes the last array element and returns the element. The shift method is going to remove the first array element and return that element to us. So my array dot, let me just be changing the methods. So if we shift, we don't need to pass in any arguments here. So if we shift this now, it is going to return BMW and give it to us. And when we log our array, BMW is going to be out of the array, and we're going to have Volvo and Benz only because it has shifted the first element of the array. We also have onShift. onShift also works like push. The way shift works like pop but at the end, or shift works like push but at the front. So Let me put shift here so you can see that. Also have unshift. What unshift does is it adds an element to the front of the array, so it makes the index 0 elements. It changes the index 0 elements and returns the new array left, the length of the array. So we have unshift here. We add an argument of the what we want to add to the end. So let's add, I don't know, Audi, and then let's run this. I read of unshift is not a function. Oh, sorry. It's a small letter S. The unshift method takes a small s. So that way we have 4 as the length, because it returns the length of the new array, and then Audi has been added to the array. So that's what the unshift method does. So the next method we are going to look at is, next thing we are going to look at is deleting elements from an array. Since arrays are objects, we can delete using the delete keyword. So you just access the element you want to delete with their index and then use the delete keyword. So let's try to delete Volvo from this our array now. We know the index of Volvo is 1, so we access my ID is having a bit of trouble. Let me reload the ID a little. Let me pause this while I'm reloading the ID. Okay, so now let's try to delete Volvo. We know that the index of Volvo is 1, so we just use delete and then we access the element we want, my array of the index 1. Why is the editor giving me this? And then let's log the new array, the array after deleting the element. I'll have to debug this thing. The editor is okay. So you use delete, use the delete keyword. It's how to spell it. It's a reserved keyword in JavaScript. So use the delete keyword and delete the elements from the array, and then we'll log the array we want. And we have that. So looking at this console now, can we see we have something here, one empty item. So this is what I can put, this is what I call an undefined O. We deleted that object, but the array did not shift or did not readjust itself to occupy that position, so we have an hole in our array. So this is why you don't use the delete keyword for arrays, or it is not advisable to use the delete keyword. It's preferable to use shift or pop when you want to remove elements from an array. So let's talk about the splice keyword. In situations where you cannot use shift or pop, use the slice method to remove elements from an array. But the major use of the splice method is to add elements to an array. So let me show you how the splice method works. So this is the syntax here. My array, documentation, the method. Now the splice method takes three arguments. The first one is the position where you want to add a new element. The second one is the number of elements that should be removed from the array. And the third, the rest of the parameters, like strings or anything, will define the elements that you want to add to an array. So let's add certain parameters. So the first one is going to be the index where you want to add an element to an array. So let's say we want to add an element at index 2. So that will be where Benz is currently. and it's going to shift bends to the right and add this to index 3 and add the element to that place. Number of elements we want to remove, so let's leave 0 because we're not removing any elements, and what we want to add. So let's say we want to add, I'll go to and then let's log our array. Let's run this. So can we see here from the console we have added Audi to index 2 and we've shifted bends to index 3 and we've not removed any element. So let's do the same thing while removing one element. So what we have here now is we've added Audi to index 1 and then we've removed bends. So that is what we use array.splice for. There's so many other uses for array.splice, but this is like basic usage for it. If you play around with it, you'll find out so many other things you can use it for. So let me show you another use of splice. So rather than using the delete keyword, we can use splice to remove elements from an array. The way we just remove bends from the array now, let's add 0 elements. So it means we're not adding any elements, and we're removing 2 elements. So we're going from index 0 and we're removing 2 elements. This way we're going to remove BMW and Volvo without leaving undefined holes in our array. So when we log our array, we have only bends because we removed BMW and we removed Volvo, and we don't have any undefined holes in our array. So that's how we use splice to add elements and remove elements from our array. So let's talk about merging arrays, merging 2 arrays. So we've talked about using push to add an element to an array and unshift. Now we can use concatenation to merge 2 arrays. So where is this thing? Is concat. It's called concatenation of 2 arrays. So what it does is merges 2 arrays, but it does not modify the initial array, it creates a new array. So all the methods we've been talking about before, they modify the initial array, but this concat creates a new array. So let's create another array that will merge to the first array. Let's create an array of colors. We have red, blue, yellow, etc. So now the syntax here is just console. Let me log it to the console because it's creating a new array. Okay, let me just declare it const new array got to my array dot concat. I'll be putting the array that we want to add to it, my colors. Then let's log new array. And also let's log our initial array. Let's run this. So here, when we log the new array that we've concatenated, that we've added my colors, the second array to, we have BMW, Volvo, Benz, and then continuation red, blue, and yellow. So it has merged those 2 arrays into one array. And then if we try to access our initial array, we still have it. So we still have our initial arrays unmodified while creating a new array of the merged arrays. So that's what concat does. So the concat method can also take any number of arguments. So we can have like one array, we can add another array, so we can add like any number of arrays to it. It's not just adding 2 arrays, you can add any number of arrays. You just put adding more arrays as arguments in here, and we're going to add them to the initial array and create a new array and return it. You can also take in strings as arguments, so we can add a new string, added string to this array. When we run it, it's going to push that string into our new array. So we can see at the end here that we have added string that has been pushed into our new array. That is how concat works. So the next method we are going to be looking at is slice. So now don't try to mix splice and slice together, they're different. So you have slice, array.prototype.slice. The slice method slices out a piece of an array into a new array. So we've been talking about splice, unshift, push, pop, join, and to string. Those arrays have been modifying the initial array. But now coming down to concat creates a new array, and slice too also creates a new array, because there will be situations we need to know the difference between these methods, because there will be situations where you need to act on the initial array, and methods when you need like a new array. You don't want to modify your initial array because you might need it for other steps in the program. So you want to create a new array to work on while keeping your initial array. So you have methods like concat and slice here. So what slice does is it slices out a part of the initial array and returns it. So for example, let's log little sim. So it returns a new array. So let's say my array.slice. It's still the same. So for accessing this thing. So what we have here is the slice method takes in 2 arguments. So let's say my array.slice 0, 2. Let's run this. We have BMW and Volvo. So what happened here is the first argument is the starting point where the slicing is going to start from, and the second argument is where your slicing is going to end, but not including that index. So it's going to start from index 1, from index 0, go to index 1, but not include index 2. So what we're going to have here is index 0 BMW, index 1 Volvo, and it's going to return a new array with BMW and Volvo. So that is how the slice works. If you remove the second argument, it's going to slice from the first index up to the last index to the end of the array. So that is how array.slice does. It returns a new array from your initial array. So the next method we're going to talk about is sorting arrays now. So the sort method sorts an array alphabetically. What is important to note here is alphabetically. So it doesn't sort by numbers, it sorts alphabetically, which is very important when you're sorting. So let's sort my array alphabetically. So you just do my array. Let me log it. So let's log sorting our array. Run this. Our array is going to be sorted alphabetically. So now we have Benz at index 0, BMW at index 1, and Volvo at index 2. So that's what sort does. Sorts our array alphabetically. So let's try and sort. Let's create a new array of numbers and try and sort them. So let's have 2 as a string. 2. Let's have 300. Let's have 6, 40. Let's have 4. And let's sort them. Oh, sorry. The new array is my colors. as a weird name for our array, but let's just use it. So after sorting this, we have 2 at index 0, 300 and the index 2, 4 and 640. So we can see that it's sorting them as strings, because 2, 3 is greater than 2, 4 and 6 is greater than 4. But 300 is supposed to be greater than 4, but since 3 is less than 4, it's sorting 300 before 4. So to sort an array like this, we add a function. It's called a compare function. So what the compare function it does is to sort an array of numbers. What the compare function it does is it takes in arguments and then it returns a value. It returns a value, either negative, positive, or 0. So the compare function looks like this. So it's a function, takes in 2 arguments, a, b, and then returns a minus b. So for this compare function now, if a minus b returns a negative number, a is sorted before b, means a is smaller than is lesser than b. If a minus b returns a positive number, b is sorted before a, which means b is lesser than a. And if it returns 0, nothing is going to happen to them. So let's pass this compare function now into our array.sort. So the function, I'm going to use an arrow function this time because we don't need this keyword. B return a minus b. We use an implicit return here. It's just on one line. I'll run this. And we have a correctly sorted array: 2 at the first index, 4, 300 and 650. So that's why we use the compare function to sort our arrays. So now we are going to look at our next method, which is the reverse method. So reverse method works just like the sort method, alphabetically, emphasis on alphabetically, and then use it to reverse the array. So basically we just do by, let me log it. And what we have here, it reverses our array, so from front to back. So I think what we should think of a way to do is, yes, I'm going to add this to our assignment. We are going to reverse an array without using the reverse function. So I'm going to use a for loop to reverse an array. I'll type that in down. So the next method we are going to look at is speaking of for loops. So now we're going to go about ways to iterate over an array. We're going to look at the for each method, the map method, the filter method, the reduce method, every, sum, index of, last index of, find, and find index. Okay, next thing is we're going to look at methods that iterate over an array. Iteration. But now let me change this from my colors because you're seeing 2s. I'm changing to my numbers. We're going to be using mostly the numbers array now. So now the first method we are going to be looking at is array.forEach. So the way array.forEach works is it iterates over each element. For each is like a for loop, but for each element in the array, like it's inside the name already. So array.forEach iterates over each element in the array, and it takes in a function and then it applies that function to each element in the array. So let me just show you. So is my numbers. That's the array we'll be using. Dot for each. Now the argument is going to be taken in is a function, and which is an arrow function. Yeah, so it's going to take in an argument for each. Let's just say element. You can also take in an index and the array itself. So these are the arguments it takes in. It takes in the element. So for each element in that array. So element refers to each element in the array that is written over. Index is the index of that element, and array is the array, like the array itself. So I'm going to use an arrow function here. Now we have for each element we are going to add the index to it. So let's return element plus index, and let's log my numbers to it. Let me log this. Okay, so the for each now works on the numbers. So for each element in this array now, we are going to take the index. So now what we want to do is log the element plus the index here, and this is what we have. Notice that if we log the array again, it doesn't modify the array and it doesn't return anything. So if we try to return this now, we are going to get undefined. So that is how the for each function works. The next iterator we are going to look at is map. array.prototype.map. So what the map function is, it does is, it is similar to the for each. It takes the same arguments, element, the element or the value, the index and the array, but this time it returns a new array. So the map returns a new array. So for this, let's do this now. So return lem plus index. So it's dot map, and when we log this, let's console, because it's going to return a new array, so we can log that new array. And we have a new array adding the element and the index together. So 2, 3, 1, 6, 4, 2 and 7. So now you know the situations where you are going to use map when you need to return a new array, and for each when you don't want to return anything. So the next iterator we're going to look at is filter. Array.filter. So the same thing with map and for each. Array.filter takes in 3 arguments: the value or the element, the index and the array. But what filter does is it creates a new element, a new array. So filter returns a new array with elements that passed a certain condition in that function. So let's say you want to filter from this our numbers now. You want to filter out the numbers that are greater than 100. We use the filter function to remove elements that are greater than 100. So maybe we want to return elements that are less than 100. So that's what we use the filter option for. So since it returns a new array, we can log it, the new array. So my numbers, use the filter. That's filter. So it takes in a function, the element, index and the array itself. And what it returns, okay, I think I have one less parenthesis here. What it returns is, so what we want to filter out is if the element is less than 100. Well, this is greater than. So return elements that are less than 100. So if we run this, use a small number, capital N. 2 and 4, since 300 and 640 are greater than 100. So that is how the filter method works. The next one we're going to look at is reduce. Array or reduce. The reduce method, just like the initial ones we've been looking at now, it runs a function on each element on an array to reduce it to a single value. So the methods we'll be looking at now, they return a new array or they don't return anything at all. Reduce takes everything in that array, runs a function on them, and reduces everything into one value. It goes from left to right. Emphasis on left to right. So when you're trying to create your reduce array, you know that the reduction goes from left to right. There's also reduce right method, which goes from right to left. And it does not modify the original array, so you can still access your original array. It is not going to modify your original array, just returns a new value that has been reduced from that function. So let's reduce my numbers. Let me lock it so I don't this thing. So we're still going to be using our logger. It's going to be my numbers dot reduce. So what reduce takes in an accumulator. So accumulator, which is like the initially reduced values. So it takes in an accumulator. It takes in the elements. So for each element on the array, so that's each element is acting on, takes in the index of the current element and the array itself. So reduce takes in four arguments: an accumulator, the element, the index, and the array itself. Parentheses are not closed. Okay, so the function, it takes in a function now. So let's say it takes in, let's say what we want is we want to add every element in our array together. So it's going to be our accumulator, return accumulator. The accumulator is like every element that has been reduced before, so plus element. So the way this works is for when this function runs, when this function that is reduced is taken in, when it runs, I think I've covered that up. Still have some missing parentheses, so yes. No. So when it runs, the accumulator starts from 0. So it goes over the first element, which is 2 here. It adds it to the accumulator because that's what we are doing here. We're adding the element to the accumulator. So 2 plus 0, we have 2 now. The accumulator becomes 2. It moves on to the next element, 300 plus the accumulator, which is 2 now. That's 302. The accumulator becomes 302. Moves on to the next element, 640, and that way till it gets to the end of the array. So when we run this now, it's going to return one single value, which is the addition of every element in the array. So that is what we use reduce for, to reduce every element in an array to a single value based on the function we pass into it. So the next method is every. So the every method, what the every method does is it checks through the values of the array, and if they pass a certain function, like we're going to pass in a function, and if every value of that array passes, it's going to return true. But if a single value does not pass, it's going to return false. Same thing with sum. So we have every, just like the previous methods, every takes in the element, the index, and the array, and we have sum. So what every does is if every element in that array passes that test, it's going to return true. While sum, if just one element in that array passes that element, that method, that function, the test, is going to return true. So let's just use every and sum here to explain, and we'll log them out. And we pass in a function, the element, index, and the array, and what we are returning is if return if the element is greater than 100. So what this is going to check is if every element in this array is greater than 100, and we're going to have false because we have two elements that are less than 100. But if we switch this to array.sum, so if we use sum, it's going to return true because we have two elements that are greater than 100. So the next method we are going to check is index of. The index of returns the index of, like, basically it's just a name, it returns the index of an element. So if you are checking for something, if there's an element and want to check the index of it, index of is going to return it. So for example, now we want to find the index of Volvo in our array. So we have my array dot index of, and we pass in the element we want to find the index of Volvo, and it's going to return the index of Volvo to us. Oh, sorry, of starts with a capital. Also, we can also declare index of takes two arguments, the element we want to find and the starts. So we can say we want to start searching from 2. So let's add, we want to start searching from index 2. So it's going to skip index 0, index 1 and start searching from index 2. So here if we run this, we are going to get -1, because if the elements cannot be found in the array, the index of operator will return, the index of method will return -1. So that's how index of works. The next method we are going to check is last index of. Just like index of, in index of, if you use index of and you find multiple, if you use index of and you find multiple elements with that value, like multiple indexes with the same value, maybe Volvo appears 2 times in our array, it's going to return the first one. So what last index of does is it goes through the array and returns the last index of, let's say there are like 5 Volvos in our array. It returns the last index of the last Volvo, the index of the last Volvo in the array. So that's what last index of does. So the next method is array.find. See, just like index of now, the array dot, when we use array.index of, we find a specific element and we add the index we want. Array.find finds the element in an array that passes a specific test. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass in a function which will take in the usual arguments, elements, array, the element, index, and array. So let's say array, we are going to find an element in an array that passes a test in that function. So let's pass in a function here, and then so it's going to iterate over the elements, the index of the element is currently iterating on, and the array itself. Now let's say we want to find the element in this array. Let me use my numbers so we can use numbers. It's always clearer to use numbers. We want to find the number in this array that is less than 10. So element less than 10, and it's going to return the, is there no elements less than 10? We have 2 elements less than 10. Oh, sorry, I'm using index of. Fine. So it's going to return the, my number is not defined. Oh, my numbers. So it's going to return the index of the, it's going to return the element, sorry, the element that passes that test. So the element that is less than 10, the first element that passes that test. So the first element that is less than 10 is going to return it. And the last one is find index. So just like find, but instead of returning the element, it's going to return the index of that element. So what find index does is, you know, it returned the first element here, which was 2. Now it's going to return the index of 2, and the index of 2 in this array is 0, so it's going to return 0. And that's the last method we are going to be looking out for arrays. I'm also trying to read up on more array methods, but these are the major methods you are going to use when you're working with arrays. And that will be all for today. The next class we are going to talk about strings and numbers. Strings, numbers, dates, and the math object.